Pauper Players Podcast. I'm Frusile, and thank you so much for joining me this week. My guest is synonymous with Pauper. If you don't know my next guest, you must have just started playing this format, because Birbman is Pauper, plain and simple. He makes the decks that define the metagame. He makes the content that sets the standard for other content creators. He does a fantastic play-by-play for the Pauper Premier League. You have to know Birbman, or you are new to this space. And if you are new to this space, the philosophy of this podcast is to talk to the players that shape the format. I can think of no better example. Enjoy. Thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. For anyone not familiar with you, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
So I'm Birbman263 or Entropy263, depending on where you see me. I've been grinding Pauper for a while. I'm the Tron guy. Probably one of the few streamers who's been at it for as long as I have as well. So, yeah, probably have heard of me at least.
Anyone unfamiliar with Birbman who is viewing this on YouTube, check out the sidebar. You'll find him there under Pauper's finest content. Before you were a Pauper player, you were just a Magic player. Can you tell me about your journey as a Magic player? How did you get started? How did you discover Pauper? And then why did you stay with Pauper?
I originally started playing in Return to Ravnica. A high school buddy of mine took me out to the opening night. I bought one of those pre-built decks, got my ass kicked, and the competitive nature of me, I had to go back and win. So me being a poor high school student, I'm a poor college student now, nothing's changed, but me being the poor high school student I kind of had to make my own decks all the time and to compete in the standard metagame of the FNM. And then eventually I ended up switching to mainly draft. I think I drafted all the way up to, I want to say Theros was the last set I heavily drafted. I kind of quit around cons, on paper at least, because my store ended up not really going out of business, but closing because some people decided to rob the Magic card only section of his store, and the dude was retired, and it was just kind of a hobby of his running the store, so he decided he didn't want to be a part of a community that would rob him like that. So I moved to online then, and I was still pretty poor, so I moved into Pauper because I was by far the cheapest at the time. Standard was pretty expensive, and kind of just fell in love, and I've been playing it since.
Okay, so let's hop into your challenge finish. Yesterday, you had a wonderful finish with what is clearly the most unique and the most interesting of these lists that were published. You definitely brought the spice. Tell us a bit about the deck. Give us sort of the rundown and how happy you are with its current iteration.
Yeah, sure. So the deck itself is the Mystic Sanctuary Familiars deck. The second I saw that card, I wanted to brew with it. It's obviously busted. I knew it was powerful. Even more so than when I saw Astrolabe and I put it in Tron. Like, I saw Mystic Sanctuary and I said, I'm going to break this card. So Familiars is kind of my first attempt at really trying to break it. It originally started out with a pretty similar shell, I believe. I'm on my third iteration, but the third iteration is like maybe 10 cards different from the first one. I originally just started going more down the combo. Like, the original build had Mnemonic Wall still, and then I just ended up shaving that out because why play Mnemonic Wall when you can play a land and win? The biggest tech recently was the Giga Drow's sideboard plan. I think what improved our worst matchup of Jeskai, and that kind of was what really clicked for the deck. Once I had a good Jeskai matchup, I think the deck is just really powerful. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the deck list is at right now. If I changed anything, it's going to be like 1 or 2 cards in the sideboard at this point. Got optimized pretty quick. The deck kind of builds itself.
Now, this deck is, as the kids say, big-brained. For anyone looking at your deck who maybe has not played Familiars before, maybe doesn't understand what's going on, can you walk us through the combo?
Yeah, sure. I didn't even think of that. I've been playing since Cloud of Fairies, so I didn't even think of Big Brain. I'm just so used to these convoluted Pauper Flicker combos. So the combo itself is to have 2 Familiars out to make your Ghostly Flicker cost 1 mana, at least 3 islands, as well as the Mystic Sanctuary to recur your Flicker, and then it usually starts out with, I evoke Muldrifter for 1 mana, I Flicker targeting my Sanctuary and my Muldrifter for 1 mana, Sanctuary on taps off the Flicker, so it's a net 0 mana for the Flicker. Put Flicker on top, draw 2, so I net 1 card. I draw my entire deck eventually. Then I play Cancrix, and then I Flicker Sanctuary on my Arkham's Astrolabe, which is no permanent for Cancrix. And that way I'm only drawing one card, which is that flicker I'm putting on top with the Sanctuary every turn until Kankrik smells my opponent out.
Doesn't sound convoluted at all. That's very point and click, I'd say. Super straightforward.
Yeah, definitely. Compared to the old Cloud of Fairies decks where it would involve, like familiar Cloud of Fairies, untap my stuff, tap stuff, snap you, play Mole Drifter, find my other familiar, that was convoluted back in the day. It's a whole lot easier now.
Well, it looks pretty nasty, honestly. It looks like a lot of fun to play as well. Definitely down to do some goldfishing combo myself. It's something I've always liked in other formats. It's exciting to see that in Pauper, because one of the critiques people have of the format at times is our lack of combo decks, or in the previous metagame, the complaint that in order to be a combo deck, you still had to use the combat step. So this is a pure combo deck.
Yeah, it's even more than that, because when was the last time we've had a deck that kills you from hand entirely? Because this deck can on turn 5. You play 2 familiars, you flicker your lands, you put flicker on top, evoke Drifter, and you draw your flicker again. That's all from hand. The previous, staple combo deck was Tribe, which you had to untap with. The most recent Pauper combo deck that I can think that won from hand was Drake's. And even then, I don't know if it won entirely from hand. It might have had to have some board state a lot of the time. So I think it's a pretty big deal that we have a deck that can just win from hand like that in Pauper.
It's beyond exciting for me, given my history with the game and the decks that I traditionally tend to play. This is so far up my alley. Like, this is exciting. And interestingly enough, still legal. Now, today is the 7th of October, and there was the update to the banned and restricted announcement. No changes. Let me get your take on that.
So I don't hate me for this, but I actually agree with the no changes for this current ban list. I am an advocate for an ephemerate ban, but at the same time, we just had a new set, and I've proven this set is powerful. It has good cards that can shake up the metagame. I think banning a card right after we get a new set with stuff that obviously makes waves is a mistake. Whether ephemerate should or shouldn't be banned doesn't really matter. The fact that we just got new cards kind of makes banning a very hard decision to make, and I think it's just wiser to wait.
Yeah, I think that's a good take, that timing is important in a lot of things, and that timing should be reflected in the decisions that Wizards of the Coast makes. And that probably explains why there wasn't any changes made to any formats, is that there is a new set that just came out that could shake up, a few of them.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of unfortunate timing, because I really would have preferred Wizards be more open about their policies. They seem to have a habit of holding on to information between deck lists lately, as well as just their banning philosophy. Like every single format, they could have written several paragraphs on why they didn't change anything. I would just, as a consumer and a Magic player on a high level, I just want more transparency from Wizards on stuff like that personally.
Yeah, it is worth recognizing that there were no changes in any formats to allow for new cards to make impacts. Well, you are certainly a high-level Pauper player. You're known for your success in the challenges. You're known for your content online. But above all else, you are a brewer. Can you tell me about that? Can you tell me about what draws you to brewing?
Yeah, so I actually really, really love brewing. As I said earlier in my story, even when I was a poor high school student, I was brewing because I only had so many cards. I couldn't go and buy the latest thing. I built my decks by drafting and then trading entirely within the local game store, so I had only what was there to work with, and I still stayed competitive. And that kind of transferred over to Pauper. Initially I did just copy a mono blue control list, but ever since right after the Drake era, I've basically only played deck lists that are my own. Tron, I've always played my own lists. The original control list, I kind of added my own stuff. I was the first one to do well with 10 Tron lands instead of 12, so definitely always innovating myself there. Latest is the Priest Tribe, and I was the first one to add Astrolabe into Tron, and then now we have this Familiars list. So I definitely am not, I am successful with my brewing, which is always nice, but as far as brewing itself, I like it as a competitive Magic player. It gives you an edge that not really any other player can take on you. It is your deck list. You know it inside and out because you built it. And I think that's just a huge value, that you have this information that your opponent will never have. And that typically is enough to eke out quite a few percentage points over your opponents.
Well, before touching on familiars, let's talk about Blue-Eye Priest for a second. It's from the previous metagame. We actually played a match before you had that list published, and I was absolutely clueless as to what was going on.
Oh, that was a good time. I went 22-1. I remember, because I was just blown away. That's kind of the power level of it.
I remember thinking you were just on the classic shell of Tribe, and I was thinking, hey, look, free win. Because, I was with Blue-Black Delver, Blue-Black XD, whatever you want to call it, had access to Snuff Outs, which led to a lot of free wins against Tribe during the combo turn, and I was pretty pleased with how everything was going, is killing your creatures and everything, and then all of a sudden you drop this Thutmose High Priest, and that game just turned 180 degrees very fast.
Yeah, that deck list is probably the most punishing as a brew because you remove your tribe opponent's creatures aggressively. It's what you do, and then I drop Priest and get them all back while cantripping my tribe combo cards, and I blow you out of the water. Until you know that's going on, you don't really stand a snowball's chance in beating me. And even then, once people figure out how to play versus me, the deck was still a real threat, it's probably one of my proudest brews because of that.
That deck was very well designed and was an absolute powerhouse with its ability to win early with the tribe combo or just go long and outvalue the opponent as the game progressed. It had access to an exciting early game as well as having a robust late game. Really made it quite the contender. But I don't want to get too lost in the previous metagame. Let's talk about what you're doing now. You found a way to go infinite with Mystic Sanctuary when most other brewers are just focused on the obvious synergy with Deprive.
Yeah, so I actually did brew with Deprive. I built a blue-red draw go deck. I had decent results with it in the leagues. Nothing bad, 3 2s, 4 1s, no 5-0s. But the deck felt fine. The problem is it wasn't broken. It wasn't powerful. Like, depriving and bouncing it back and drawing a deprive later is not on the power level of Muldrifter and Ephemerate, which is kind of the bar if I'm planning on playing past turn 5. So I think kind of the next step after that is, okay, if I can't play a fair game, let's play an unfair game. What's the most unfair thing you can do with Sanctuary? Ghostly Flicker. And that kind of leads itself towards familiars from there.
So recently you had the ability to be a guest and to do some commentary for the Pauper Premier League. What was that like?
Oh yeah, it was a really great experience actually. So the commentator's seat is quite a bit different from the player's seat. I have perfect information. From the player's seat, I'm always trying to play the game from my opponent's side because that's just how you can anticipate their plays. But when you can see their hand, it's just a really interesting thought experiment as well as just a fun experience because you get to see both sides and you get to predict how both players should and shouldn't play and how they're actually going to play because they don't have perfect information. So there's a lot learned from commentating itself as well as it just being a fairly fun experience in itself.
Although I did miss your commentary. I was relocating during that time period. I was trying to spend a lot of time with people that, I wasn't sure if I'd ever see again. But by all accounts, you did a fantastic job, and it sounds like you had a great time.
Yeah, it was definitely, I'm really happy I got to do it. I think I would have been disappointed if I was unable to commentate for that.
Let's talk about the format championship. When you previously joined me, you brought up the fantastic observation that first place for the event is a bit undefined in some of its rewards.
Yeah, so they market it as basically an invite to the Pro Tour and the Magic Online Championship Series, and then they change it. Wizards kind of is going through a rebranding phase, and it makes it pretty awkward for stuff that gets put on the back pedal like these online championship stuff when they're focusing on arena and all that. So it ends up being pretty awkward because they made a promise that they're going to give us these events, but it doesn't really fit into their current game plan. As I see it personally, because I love Pauper, I see it as a way to declare yourself the Pauper champion. I am the best player in Pauper because I won this event. To me, the Pro Tour is just kind of secondary, mainly because I don't really understand if I'm even going to the Pro Tour or what that actually means, like how much I get out of winning outside of the title.
Well, the Magic Online Championship, the actual championship, that invitation is both prestigious and it does have a tangible dollar amount associated with it. But what's a Pro Tour invite even worth these days? Do they still pay for your plane ticket?
Yeah, I don't know that either, actually. If I win, I don't even know if I'll go if they don't pay for your plane ticket. I gotta find a deck because I only play Pauper online, and then I have to pay for air and housing possibly, and that's just a lot of money for an event that is known for a very low success rate between individual players.
Yeah, I can imagine scrambling to assemble a paper deck sounds frustrating, and I'm sure it's going to be standard. It seems like they always are standard these days. So go ahead and add about, 10 or 20 hours at a minimum of playtesting that you need to do for that format.
They do a decent amount of modern too. I think it's like 2 to 3 standard for every one modern, if I had to guess a ratio.
Okay, fair enough. If it's modern, let's just go ahead and add 40 to 60 hours of playtesting instead.
I'm going to be honest, I'm pretty full of myself. I don't know how much I'd test Modern. I'd probably play some linear combo deck because I know how to play combo that doesn't need to respect what my opponent's doing, because that way I don't have to test as much. I don't have to care what my opponent's doing outside of the handful of interaction spells any deck can do.
That's a pretty clever solution. You should probably still set some time aside, though, to draft the format that would be played.
Yeah, definitely. I used to draft a lot, but it's been a hot minute since I've done any drafts seriously, at least.
Well, let's talk about your content. You stream the challenge every Sunday. You upload the challenge to YouTube the very next day, and you also get a few streams in a week based on your school schedule. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so I've been doing it for, oh gosh, I want to say like 2 years, maybe a year and a half, around there. It's originally just started out as like, hey, I got this tech, I got a new computer, I can actually stream, I'm going to give it a go. I kind of really enjoyed it. It makes me a better player because I have to explain what I'm doing to the people who are watching me. You'd be surprised at how silly you look when you're making a bad play and you try to explain it. You will learn your lessons pretty quickly. Originally, when I was, that low viewer account, because who watches Pauper and stuff, I was doing it because it made me a better player. And then eventually I actually got this community I have now, and it's a very lovely community. Like, they're all nice people. It's hard to explain how wonderful it is to have people who show up to watch you and say they love your content. It's not something I want to let go of, so I'm going to continue streaming.
It's awesome you've been doing that for so long. Being new to the content creation game myself, I have to be honest, it's really weird putting yourself out there.
Yeah, it definitely takes some getting used to, doesn't it?
Well, I'm going to be honest. I have plenty of confidence in my personal life, but making content actually makes me really insecure. I have no idea if I've done a good job, if I should have done something different. It's weird when you're at the center. You just have no perspective. I mean, how do you judge your work?
So this came up last time. The standard I've held myself up to this entire time, like ever since I started, would I watch my content? Would I enjoy my content? I don't really think it matters what other people say about your content as much as about what you personally think, because you're a person out in the world, right? So if you would watch your content, it's guaranteed that other people would. So typically when I end a stream and I'm like, I wouldn't watch this, I hated it, I feel bad because that means I made bad content. I enjoy it when I know I'm producing content that I would watch myself, and I typically use that as my barometer for the level of content I produce.
Well, it's kind of weird to listen to yourself have a conversation that you've already had, but I am trying to make the podcast that I wanted to exist that didn't exist before. So I guess by that standard, I should just keep moving forward. So you just play live with no delay?
Yeah, I don't stream a delay. Honestly, if you're petty enough to go ahead and snipe me, you can go ahead and do that. I don't think it's worth the loss in value between viewer interaction.
You're just not worried about getting stream sniped, even in the challenge with higher stakes?
No, I've had a few people snipe me before, but overall, I think it's far more rewarding to have chat there with you. I think it adds a lot to value. I think it means something to the viewers as well. I tend to enjoy streams more when the streamer is able to answer my questions immediately. The 5-minute delay complicates things quite a bit. You don't get as good commentary on the game as well. It's kind of harder to follow when the chat and the streamer are disconnected.
I've seen some streamers use a block or a cover to hide their hand, which allows them to keep their secrets while still playing live. Have you ever done that?
I've done it a total of 1 time, and that was in the first Pauper Championship qualifier, because that is an important event that actually meant quite a bit to me. It meant more to me than my stream at that point because I really cared about it. I streamed it with no delay but a hand cover for a known stream sniper, I won't mention names, and that was the only time I used a hand cover. Overall, I don't like to do it because a lot of the game, that the intricacies, especially in Pauper, come from what's in your hands. The actual board is fairly innocuous. Like, let's take my familiars deck, for example. I'm building up my turn, I'm staring at 2 familiars, and I want to Giga Draws my Jeskai opponent. If there's a hand cover there, like, my viewers are going to see 1 or 2 dudes on board me cantripping. That's not very good viewership, is it? No. Instead, I can show them my hand, and the cantrip suddenly becomes much more involved. The lines become much more involved, and it's just overall more interesting.
Well, what about the championship? What's the plan for that?
I haven't decided yet. If I do stream it, I think I'd probably do a delay with no hand cam, or not no hand. I probably wouldn't do a cover if I do a delay, or I would do a cover with no delay. I don't know if I'll stream it or not, though. I'll definitely record it. I just haven't decided on the stream. I tend to decide these things a day before. I'm usually pretty indecisive.
So I know you and I have joked about having excessive Pauper points before. Are you still just hovering around 300?
Yeah, I'm still at 300 despite this last event. I think I'm 297, so pretty much 300.
Well, I have exactly 34, which means I no longer have extras to work with now that they've added an additional playoff. What's your take on them adding an additional playoff?
I think it's a poor decision. So this entire thing was marketed as at the end we're going to have 32 players. That's a very nice number for Swiss, right? So now what are we going to do that we have 40? That destroys everything. It kind of ruins the tournament experience just because some people woke up late and failed to enter in time. I think it's the peoples who were late. I think it's their fault, their loss. It's pretty mean of me to say that, but the event filled up and they should have been there earlier. There's always a limited amount of players and regular GPs as well, to an extent.
Okay, I disagree with the burden of blame being on the players. Yes, they could have gotten up earlier. They could have even registered the night before the events. I feel that the burden here falls on Wizards of the Coast for poor planning and having a low tournament cap when it's just an arbitrary number. They raised the number immediately after. Now these format championships can accommodate far more players. Why didn't they just have that in the first place? They just assigned an arbitrary number, which created this problem. So this is just poor planning from Wizards.
I agree that it's poor planning from Wizards' point, but adding another tournament is not the fix that's required. It happened. It's a combined blame of Wizards and the late players, but Wizards is entirely responsible for adding that extra event. It kind of shows incompetence, if you ask me. I don't really know a better word for it. It's kind of a harsh word. It might be too harsh, but in general, it destroys the quality of the tournament in the future, as well as showing everybody that they made a large mistake. They never said that we are going to have a slot for you in this tournament if you have the points for it. It's not a promise they made. It's not a promise they're obliged to fulfill. They're expected to fulfill it just because they have in the past, but I don't think it was a requirement, and I think adding an extra tournament is the worst decision they could have added.
I guess the silver lining is that there's going to be a little bit more room for some talented players, for some more heavy hitters to be joining us in January.
At the same time, as both of us are already qualified, I'm going to use this word, it's kind of a weird word because I'm a marketing major, it's thrown around everywhere in business. Is it fair to us as players who have already qualified for Wizards to give us 8 more opponents that we have to beat that wasn't in the original announcement?
Well, it's certainly less prestigious now to qualify for the event. There's 40 players being allowed to play instead of the original 32.
Exactly. The only winners are those who do well in this second tournament. It's an extra chance for invites, but it derails the entire premise they set up for the tournament. We signed up for a qualifier for a 32-person format, and now it is no longer that. But we have already kind of thrown in our lot for it.
I mean, I'm still going to play the championship.
Oh, definitely. All that said, I'm still going to play. Like, not only is it adding unexpected people that you have to beat, it really destroys the actual structure of a Swiss tournament to add those 8 extra people from a purely standings point of view. You're going to have some upsets due to breakers now, when before it would be pretty clear-cut by record.
That's not something I thought about. Could you elaborate a little?
Yeah, because before it sets it up, I may be remembering improperly, but I'm pretty sure it's Swiss into a cut to top 8. Before it's a clean cut Swiss based on records with 32 people. But now we're going to have people tied in 8th, 9th, and maybe even 10th place. And some people are just going to be luckier and have better breakers. That's how they work. They're a necessary evil in odd numbered tournaments that have free entry. That's why they exist. I don't think a tournament that is at a high level competitive standing should have to deal with that issue.
Well, you mentioned before the concept of fairness.
Fair is a loaded word.
Well, here's my issue with that. Legacy has a paper world championship. They have a proper world championship for Legacy. They have for some time. They have a vintage world championship with, it's a paper event. It's existed for a very long time. Those are proper world championships for eternal formats. We don't have a world championship of Pauper. This is the closest thing that we have to a world championship of Pauper. This is essentially the world championship of Pauper. So you're telling me that there's going to be a 9th place, right? There's maybe even be a 10th place finisher that has the same number of points as the rest of the top 8. They're going to be denied having that honor of making it to the playoffs of the format championship, making it to the single elimination rounds based off of tiebreakers. That's not something I had thought of before, and now that you mention it, isn't fair, is not something that I'm a fan of.
I agree wholeheartedly. It's part of why it's such a thorny subject for me, because I've already qualified and it feels like they're taking away a percentage chance for me to win this championship and deviating from the original plan. This event means a lot to me. It's probably going to be one of the most important events in my Magic career because I only play Pauper, and this is the biggest Pauper event in history. So just having a wrench thrown into the tournament's plan is a pretty tough thing to swallow, to be completely honest.
Well, fairness aside, there's really nothing that we can do about it.
Yeah, and the decision has already been made. It's not really reversible, even though we're discussing it now. It's kind of like bans. You may not agree with it, but there's nothing you can do about it.
Let's talk a little bit more about brewing. What do you have in store at this time for everyone else playing this format? What are you working on right now?
Yeah, currently the game plan is just to break Mystic Sanctuary more. Moving forward, I'm sure there's still innovations left to be found. Every time I play this Mystic Sanctuary deck, I learn something new. I'd be surprised if I don't improve the deck and myself. Until people figure out how to beat me, I'm going to keep playing it. I'm 2 weeks in a row, 5-2 record, so I don't really see a reason to switch around.
Well, let's talk about the challenge then. You just took 3rd. What did you play against in the tournament?
So round 1 we played against Mono Black Control. Took down the last challenge, but it's pretty weak to Muldrifter. I always joke that Muldrifter is Mono Black Control's worst matchup, not a specific deck, but the card. And we're on deep analysis as well as that, so we just buried them in card advantage and won eventually. Round 2 was Infect. It was actually a pretty rough matchup. I think we won 2-0. No, 3 games, sorry. We have 4 Strands as our anti-aggro as well as God's Pharaoh's Faithful. That's a big part of my game plan because it's both good against Jeskai and Stompy. And Infect gets around kind of both of that because they have Glistener Elf, they have the Ichor Mirror, which is an artifact, and then they have the Blighted Agent, which is a blue card. So it's just really hard to Strands them to Fog. So I ended up winning through chumping with my Faithfuls as well as just eventually getting that Stonehorn lock. They kind of had a hard time getting around that. Round 3, I played against a regular old Affinity. I kind of demolished them. Strands and Hydro and stuff are just really great. I think it's a pretty close matchup, but this match I just kind of demolished my opponent. He was pretty upset, I guess. Got tired of losing to Flicker. And game 2, he had about 11 minutes left on his clock. I had him deterministically dead. We're at 6. He has 1 card in hand, no board really. So he can't kill me from hand. And on his upkeep, he has 0 cards because I didn't have a deep analysis to kill him right away. He decides to spend all 11 mana trying to waste my clock by floating mana. Which, don't do that. That's very rude. Not only are you wasting your time, you're wasting your opponent's time. It's just bad manners. Even if you're upset you lost, take it out somewhere else. Don't take it out on your opponent or yourself like that.
I just want to sneak something in here real fast. Life is short. Life is precious. Don't spend 11 minutes of it dirtling in your opponent's upkeep when you have no chance of winning. That's not how life is meant to be lived. I think we can all think of better things to do with our limited time on this planet. Please continue.
The best part of this, because I knew he was dead, 1 card in hand, 6 life, his biggest power is 4, so he can't fling me, he can't galv me. While he's trying to waste my clock, I have 6'd, and I played marbles with chat while he's wasting his own 11 minutes there. So it actually costed me nothing. I didn't have to worry about if he passes priority, if he plays the lethal spell, I can't F6, so I have to sit there and watch you do it. I actually was able to F6 and go and do something else.
That's fantastic. Well played.
Yeah, it definitely cracked me up. Round 4 was my first Jeskai opponent. They were the controlling build of Spellstar Sprite. I finally found out Giga Drowse is great against them. That's the first time I played against them. Fantastic. 1 and 2 games. Round 5, I believe, was my first loss to Jeskai. This one was the top 8 player, I believe, with Glinthawk and stuff. Glinthawk's really good against us. It adds that extra pressure. Yeah, if he just beat me down, I didn't get off my feet and lost. Round 6 was another Jeskai player that I managed to beat in a very close match. They were great games. I'm going to be uploading it to YouTube, so definitely check out those. Those were probably the highlight of the tournament, round 6. And then round 7 was Stompy. I lost in 2, but they were very close. I gave myself all my outs. Both games I was 1 card away from winning, so I can't say I'm too upset about the loss. Then the top 8, we played against the controlling Jeskai, which, without really as much combo, is kind of draw go, the one with Witching Well. They're even softer 2 Giga Draws than any other Jeskai deck I've seen. And at the end, we played against another Hawk Jeskai list. Lost game 1, just didn't go off, which game 1's pretty close, so it's not a big deal. Game 2, Giga Draws them down, I won. Game 3, I have 4 Faithfuls in my opening hand versus my opponent's triple Glint Hawk. It was a really weird game, but because I drew 4 Faithfuls, he was able to counter all of my card advantage, including Deep Analysis, so I was unable to get off my feet and lost. And that ended my tournament, but I believe my ending record was 2-2 against Jeskai, 3-2. Yeah, 3-2. And everything else I beat outside of Stompy, but that's just a close matchup too.
Now, I decided not to play the challenge on Sunday. I legitimately thought it would be the last day of that format's existence. I really expected some change, so I opted not to play, not to prepare, not to tune a deck for just one tournament. But en route to your third place finish, what was your play of the day?
It'd definitely have to be where I killed on turn 4. Okay, I killed on turn 4. It was my very first turn 4. It was fantastic. So on stream, I'm talking about how the turn 5 is the average for this deck, right? And I'm like, I've never gotten to turn 4. It's theoretically possible where you go turn 2 fam, turn 3 fam, turn 4 kill you. The very first game of the top 8, I'm on the draw. My opponent taps out turn 4 for an Evoke Drifter Ephemerate, which is really powerful and really good against a Familiar's deck. I untap, play my second Familiar, and kill my opponent on turn 4. Which was just really fantastic. It was amazing, especially considering I just got done talking about it.
How very modern of you to be killing your opponent on turn 4 with a combo deck. But I need to point out that's exactly where I was able to tune into your stream that day. And I believe your opponent was just dirtling with Glint Hawks and Astrolabes, and that's what he tapped out for. I don't think he actually got his own combo off in the form of Muldrift or Ephemerate. Pretty sure he just tapped out dirtling with Glint Hawk and maybe even as a Witching Well. It was some sort of one-drop artifact.
Ooh, he tapped out. Like I said, I'm horrible with memory, but he tapped out. It doesn't really matter what he tapped out for, though.
Oh, he tapped out.
Yeah, turn 4 kill was definitely my highlight. It's a pleasure killing on turn 4 with that deck. Oh my goodness. You just kind of feel like you're on top of the world.
Well, let's get into our other weekly segment here. Let's go ahead and give Slivers some silly abilities. Why don't you start us off, Burb?
Yeah, so mine, I guess it'll be on theme with our discussion earlier. Whenever a Sliver enters the battlefield, add 1 player to target Pauper Championship Series.
That is pretty timely for our discussion. I'm going to go with a different direction this week. A throwback that fans of my generation and older than me will get as reference. All Slivers have the gum disease known as gingivitis. Before I let you go this week, could you tell me a bit more about the Familiars deck as it plays? How are its matchups? How do you approach the different matchups themselves?
Yeah, sure. So that's actually a really good question. The deck is pretty complex because it has 2 ways it can win. You can play out your Familiars earlier and leverage your mana advantage to just kill from nowhere, or from somewhere, I guess. And then there's the games where you hold on to your Familiars and play it all out in one turn when your opponent stumbles or when they tap out. So that's actually... that really depends on the matchup. You got your aggro matchups, which are pretty obviously you play out your dudes as fast as you can. You want to kill your opponent before they kill you and interact as little as possible, which tends to be fairly close matchups because you're a turn 5 deck, but you have some anti-aggro, so Stompy is slowed to turn 5. You're both about the same speed. So those are usually very close matchups with a favorable post board because we have so much fog. Then we also have the other side of the spectrum where decks just can't interact with your Familiars. Look at Tron. That's probably my best matchup because we just kill them on turn 5 and there's nothing they can do about it. You play out your Familiar and it stays. They can't answer it. They can De Novo Horror it, but it's cheap to replay and they still die. So that's easily the best matchup. The big one is Jeskai. That matchup is pretty troublesome. I'd say we're slight dog game 1. Deep Analysis is a good card, but they just have so much removal and counter magic. It can be pretty hard to overcome them. You really rely on Reaping the Graves for game 1. And then post board, I'm so happy I came up with this for this latest challenge. It worked like a charm. Giga Drowse is your win con. You keep in your 4 Faithfuls and you play a bunch of cantrips so they don't kill you and you Giga Trials them end step. They counter a feud to make sure they have like a Dispel or 2 up. They always do. And then you untap and Giga Trials them again on whatever lands they have left, and you still have enough mana because the kill itself requires 5, which is pretty cheap for all things considered from hand. So this is usually like turn 8, so I can tap down 3 more lands and then kill from hand still. Those are the main matchups. I don't... Oh, right, Mono Black Control. So that one is just... You value them out. You cast your Deep Analysis, you cast your Mull Drifter. I like to cast out my familiars pretty aggressively and just rely on Reaping. You just have so many dudes that they typically just can't answer them all. Do be wary of Crypt Draft builds, then you have to play it slightly differently and prepare for a 1-turn kill. And I could consider bringing in Giga Draws versus them, but for the most part you just outvalue them. The biggest thing that I think is relevant to your win percentage in the matchup is heading into their turn 3, you want to drop a familiar if you can. Just always drop a familiar heading into their turn 3 because every single creature they have in their deck is 3 or more mana. So when you pass the turn with a familiar, they want to remove it because it's so good in the early game to leverage that mana advantage. But then they don't develop their board, and that's also not good for them. And it depends on the player. Either way, it's a win because you're either hurting their tempo by forcing them to remove it, or you get to untap with a familiar. So I think that's the biggest thing you can do is to improve your odds is play a familiar heading into their turn 3. So I think a lot of that is like, what role am I playing? Do I think my opponent is going to kill me before I can play out my hand? If so, I'm probably bringing in Strands, maybe even Stonehorn. If not, I'm looking at keeping in Faithful and kind of cutting some of that anti-aggro for maybe Giga Drowse or that extra Deep Analysis, stuff like that. So it really depends on how you define your role in that matchup. Mono Blue Delver specifically, I'd probably more than Dispel over the 2 Strands, and that's about it. Mull Drifter's great against them, so you want to resolve. Boros Monarch, I would imagine, is actually pretty tough. They kill you fast, but they also have burn spells for your familiars. I'd say they're scarier than most matchups in the field. I don't know how I'd sideboard against them, to be completely honest, right now. I just don't have a good plan because it's not a popular deck.
Well, it seems that Giga Drowse plays a significant role for both the Jeskai matchup. You said Tron's already a good matchup, but I'd imagine it comes in against Tron as well. But you're about 50-50 against Jeskai in the challenge this last weekend. Are you going to add another card for them? Are you going to add another Giga Drowse specifically?
Not quite. So I'm going to let you in on some secret tech here because I'm not going to be able to stream this week. The game plan moving forward is to add Think Twice, more flashback spells, because the key to the matchup is actually God Pharaoh's Faithful. You kill with Giga Drowse into the combo, but God Pharaoh's Faithful is what keeps you alive for those 10 turns while you're doing absolutely nothing. It lets you play those cantrips and gain life so their Skyfishers don't kill you. What Think Twice does is it lets you continue drawing cards through their counter magic as well as 2 triggers for your Faithfuls. And I think that's just better than a third copy of Giga Drowse because they're quite horrible in the early game. They're really bad.
Well, thank you for sharing that with the listeners of the podcast, although in general, you're not really one to keep your secrets to yourself.
Yeah, I tend to not be that secretive just because I stream. Yeah, I'm going to share that one. It's not like it's super, super hot tech. I'll have it public eventually.
Well, it was positively tremendous speaking with you today, for coming on, for talking about brewing, for talking about familiars, actually getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty in so much as the matchup analysis. Thank you so very much for coming on the Pauper Players podcast this week.
I guess thanks for having me on the podcast. I do appreciate you reaching out to me. Sorry I couldn't be there for the original time we had, but with the audio file and me taking a break, I just couldn't. I did enjoy the talk we had here, and I'll hope to be back in the future. Goodbye.
This week in my introduction, I said that Birbman is Pauper. Having heard him for yourself now, I'm going to let you decide. All I know is that Birbman is a pioneer of this format. He played Blue-White Priest right before they banned most of the good cards in that deck. And then he was the first guy to put Astrolabe in Tron, which is just normal now. Everyone does that. But the first time he did that, he just won the challenge the very next weekend. So he tends to be ahead of the curve. He tends to make some of the best decks of the format. And right now he's killing people on turn 4 with his combo deck. Well, you heard him. Sorry. Turn 5. But you can do it on turn 4 if you have up to this point been unfamiliar with Birbman. Please do check him out on Twitch. Please do check him out on YouTube, which if you're checking me out on YouTube means you can just go to the sidebar. You'll find him there. A note to end on this week. Next week, we're going to have James Harper, aka Vanilla James. He won a 147-player paper Pauper tournament, the largest of its kind held in North America. We're going to pick his brain about the differences between live play and online play, because The philosophy of this podcast is to hear from the players who are shaping the metagame, and he's done that in his own way. And it'll be the first opportunity we've taken to get a Pauper player. So let's hear their voice. Let's hear what he has to say. Until then.